Are we on the path to ridiculously high inflation? The price of so-called safe haven assets like gold and silver would certainly make you think so, but no one can be sure, not for a long time anyway. We could even be on the path to hyperinflation and have no idea at the minute. But that begs the question, where has hyperinflation happened before? What caused it? What can be done to fix it? Well, smash the like button, sit back and let's find out. Number 5. Greece. Greece suffered hyperinflation as a result of World War II. In preparing for the war, Greece went deeply into debt arming their military, and on top of that, the majority of the country's foreign exports collapsed because of the war. This meant that the Bank of Greece had to print money to fund these deficits, which massively increased Greece's money supply, doubling it in just 2 years. When Axis forces occupied Greece in May 1941, the new puppet government they created paid for everything by forcing the Bank of Greece to print it, and also did not introduce any additional taxes to raise money to pay for the things they wanted to do. This meant that the money the government collected covered only about 6% of the money they were spending, the other 94% having to be printed by the bank. The drachma, Greece's currency, started inflating rapidly in 1943 when the people of Greece began losing faith in the currency, believing it would continue to inflate well into the future. As a result, people started to pay for things and save their money in gold franc coins, which led even more to the fall in demand for the drachma. When the original government were able to return, they struggled to collect taxes outside of the capital city and also had to deal with sky-high unemployment and refugee costs on top of that. By this point, the money the government collected covered only 0.4% of the money they were spending, the other 99.6% being printed by the bank. To put into perspective how bad things actually got, in 1938 the Greek people held a drachma note for an average of 40 days before spending it. By November 1922, the average holding time was just 4 hours. Eventually, in 1946, Britain offered to help stabilise the Greek economy, and through their efforts, which included taxing aid goods, adjusting specific tax rates, improving tax collection methods, and creating a currency committee, sounds very official, prices began to stabilise. This helped restore public confidence and increase the national income, successfully bringing Greece's hyperinflation to an end. Number 4. Weimar Germany. This is the one you guys have probably heard about before. Again, as a result of a war, but this time World War I, Weimar Germany experienced huge hyperinflation after losing that war. Germany was required to pay repatriations to the victors of the war to make up for the costs incurred by the winning side. However, they were not allowed to pay it using their own currency, the paper mark. The mark had already been weakened significantly while the war was being fought, as Germany were using entirely borrowed money to fund their war effort. Not a great plan.
Not a great plan.
Because of their inability to pay their dues using their own currency, they were forced to sell their currency to get foreign currencies in exchange and then use this foreign currency to make their payments. When the payments came due in 1921, the fact that Germany were buying foreign currencies at any price led to runaway inflation and the severe devaluation of the mark. Number 3. Yugoslavia. Third on this list is Yugoslavia, who, back in 1992, experienced both the third worst hyperinflation of all time and the third longest hyperinflation of all time, until its currency, the dinar, collapsed. So in 1992, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was officially broken up into its constituent states, now countries: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Slovenia. However, up until 2003, Serbia and Montenegro remained one country, called the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. This country suffered greatly after the breakup of the kingdom, for a number of reasons. Trade between the former member states was completely dismantled, which led to a significant decline in production across a wide range of industries. As well as this, the large military and police force required when Yugoslavia was much larger was not downsized to match the now smaller territory, which meant it had a bloated bureaucracy which brought with it bloated costs. To make matters worse, the UN imposed an international trade embargo on the Federal Republic between May 1992 and April 1993, which only made the declining production even worse. This lower production translated into lower tax revenues, meaning the government's fiscal deficit increased from 3% of GDP in 1990 to 28% in 1993. Their answer? Print the money they needed to pay these debts, which also massively inflated the money supply. By December 1993, the country's mint was printing money 24/7, but by the time the money was in the hands of the people, it was all but worthless. Unable to print enough cash to keep up with the currency's rapidly falling value, the currency officially collapsed on the 6th of January 1994. The German mark became the new legal tender across the country for all financial transactions and the payment of taxes. Number 2. Zimbabwe. The hyperinflation in Zimbabwe is the most recent hyperinflationary period on this list. The roots of this inflation came during the 1990s, when the Zimbabwe government introduced a series of land reforms. These land reforms were brought in to redistribute the land in the country from the current white farmers to black farmers, who owned very little land compared to the whites as a result of the whites having superior political and economic status in the past. While the idea had good intentions, it had very bad consequences. The new farmers, on account of having very little experience, struggled to produce food on the scale the farms allowed for, causing a large fall in food production levels right across the country. Production in other sectors also began to fall, and later the banking sector collapsed, which meant that on top of a host of other bad things, those farmers who were actually producing food and managing their farms well were no longer able to obtain loans for expanding or upgrading those farms. From 1990 on, these land reforms meant yearly inflation rates were always sky high, regularly above 20%, but they were never near the 50% monthly inflation needed to actually call it a hyperinflation. Things accelerated, however, when Zimbabwe got involved in a war with the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the 2000s. Because they had no money to pay for anything, the government turned to the printing presses to finance the war, printing money to pay for higher and higher salaries for the army and government officials. This led to higher debts, which couldn't be paid due to the declining economy, which meant that they had to print more money, which caused more inflation. So more and more money in the economy, due to excessive money printing, coupled with less and less goods in the economy, due to the much lower farm production, and 80% unemployment, meaning businesses weren't producing anything, meant inflation shot to the moon. It peaked in November 2008, with month-on-month inflation estimated at 79.6 billion%. Yes, billion. Billion. And prices doubling almost every 24 hours. Not long after, in 2009, Zimbabwe stopped printing its currency altogether, instead opting to use currencies from other countries. Number 1. Hungary. This period of hyperinflation sets the record as the worst the world has ever seen. This hyperinflation was also different from the others because with this one, Hungary actually wanted to cause inflation. World War II brought about massive destruction throughout the whole of Hungary. The country essentially became a fighting battleground between Russia and Germany, completely destroying 50% of Hungary's industrial capacity and damaging 90% of it. And the little that remained was either taken by the Nazis back to Germany or seized as reparations by the Russians. This by itself started increasing prices, as there was the same amount of money floating around the economy, yet far fewer goods due to the drastic decrease in production. It was here though that things started taking a turn for the worse. The Hungarian government, who were seeing the purchasing power of their currency decrease, started to print more. Their reasoning was that they were powerless to stop it falling further, but they did have the power to print more, to ensure everyone had enough of the currency to buy what they now couldn't afford. This, of course, is the wrong thing to do in an inflationary situation, but Hungary at the time deemed it the most sensible path of action they could take. To give you an idea of just how much printing they performed, in July 1945, the money supply stood at 25 billion, which rose to 1.6 trillion by January 1946, to 65 quadrillion by May 1946, and finally to 47 septillion, 47 trillion, 2 months later in July. Unfortunately, as you probably expect, this led to rapidly increasing inflation, peaking at a massive 207% a day in July 1946. By August 1946, the Hungarian government introduced the forint, their new currency, which is still in use to this day, at a rate of 1 forint for every 400 quadrillion pengo, their previous currency. Luckily for the country and its citizens, inflation dropped off and became relatively stable. However, the economic damage had already been done to most of the country's workers and creditors, who saw real wages drop by 80% while creditors were completely wiped out.